Welcome back to another episode of EpicEarth. EpicEarth is a podcast for those curious about the STEM fields and the awesome, quirky, and fun experiences and research that is taking place right now. This is episode number 16, The Human Side of Science. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the ride as we take a journey around this epic Earth.
How are elements distributed in a planetary body?
What are our hopes? What are our dreams? What do we want to accomplish? And how do we accomplish it?
We can have all the science in the world, but if it's not translated, how is that helpful?
Welcome to another episode of Epic Earth. I'm Ashley Bosa, and with me, as always, I have my awesome co-host, Brian Rosenblatt.
Hey, super happy to be here.
We're happy to always have you, Brian. And we're super excited today because for the first time on the Epic Earth podcast, we are actually interviewing 3 people all together. And we're so excited because they have this amazing, amazing project that they're going to be telling us about. And so we're going to just dive in. I'm going to introduce all of them. So our first guest is Eric Jankowski. He's an associate professor in the Micron School of Material Science and Engineering, and he uses computing to understand organic materials for solar power and aerospace applications. So welcome, Eric.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah. Our second guest is Krishna Pakala. He's an assistant professor in the Department of Mechanical and Biomedical Engineering. And he uses engineering education research as an engine to identify evidence-based approaches that best enhance student experiences, which is super cool. So welcome, Krishna.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
And lastly, we have Anne Hamby, who is an assistant professor of marketing in the College of Business and Economics. And she studies the ways that consumers understand and are influenced by narratives. So welcome, Anne.
Thanks.
And so it's so great to have all of you. We have sort of a diverse background of research and applications to that research with us today. So we're super excited about that. But before we dive in really into the research and the project that we're going to be talking to you about, we first like to get to know our guests a little bit more. So we want you to tell us a little bit more about who you are. What makes you you, and how did you get to sort of the current position that you're in? So I don't know, maybe Anne, do you want to start us off?
Sure. The first thing that comes to my mind when I think of kind of key plot points in my life in terms of how I got to where I am and why I'm interested in what I'm interested in comes out of a moment of existential crisis where I was in a graduate program and I quit it because I was not feeling confident that it was what I wanted to do. I just wasn't excited about the path I was following. And so I said, I need to find something else, and just was happily plugged into an amazing opportunity that fell into my lap, which was in South Africa. My advisor at the time needed a project manager to go and help direct this Kellogg-funded project on positive youth development. And it just so happened to be a narrative-based intervention where they took the standard curriculum, health education curriculum, and kind of gave a narrative spin to it. And I saw, the control condition of the students that were getting the regular didactic lecture-based, this is what you should do. And then when there was the narrative component where students were acting or watching acting, and just how engaged they became, and it was like magic. And just getting to see those side by side, such a contrast, really sparked my interest in the role of narrative and its ability to engage and influence us. And so then happily I go like, okay, there's this thing I want to study, and return to graduate school. And that's how I ended up, some other deviations along the way where I am, but that was a critical turning point in my life.
That's great. And I think we've talked about it on our podcast before, but sometimes, life is just not linear. Like you fall into things and you decide that you just don't really like them, or that it's not really working out the way that you wanted it to. And so that's really inspirational that you could go out and find something that you were really passionate about and sort of fell into your lap a little bit.
It found me.
Yeah. That's great. Thank you so much for that. Let's see, Krishna, how about you?
Yeah, so both my profession and also, the path to my current position, both are not by design. They have been something that had to do with the experiences I've had. I came to the US to get a master's degree. That was the plan, and then get into industry and make lots of money, right? That was the plan. And then my advisor one day changed my life, where he said, I think you should teach this class by yourself in the summer. I suddenly have to go to France. I know you have never taught a class by yourself, but I think you can do it. You have been my right hand man, and students always spoke highly of you about how you help them as a teaching assistant. So I was like, okay, I will do it. And he wrote a nice email to our department chair at that time, because it was very uncommon for a master's student in their first year to teach a class by themselves. So he had to kind of make an argument why that was okay. And it was also the first time I saw like $8,000 in 2 months' time, which was huge. When I was considering that salary for a grad student at that time was 12,000 in a year. So it was huge. And then that experience really changed me. I taught a 60 student class, and I really understood the process it takes to prepare for the class, and how do you still engage students in the class. And then I thought, okay, this could be a career that I should explore. And it so happened that, based on the immigration status that I have and the timing that I needed to get jobs in, I applied for both industry and the academic world. For industry, most of the people said you are too overqualified for these jobs. For academic world, they post something, but they actually want somebody else, and it is very tough, as you know. And I had teaching experience, but I was not really looking into doing any research or anything else. So it was a very tough sell, obviously. But I needed a job, and if I didn't get it within a week, I had to leave the country. And then fortunately I had a call from Boise State, and I thought I did the interview well. And then it was actually my master's advisor again who insisted that he speak to the search committee. At that time, he was in Poland. So he made sure they called him. And I'm thinking he spoke highly of me at that time. And that actually sealed the deal. He's no longer with us. He died right during when the pandemic started. So he has been a biggest influencer in my life. And since then, I didn't look back. I realized that, maybe this is what my life is meant to be. Even my grandmother, who also died recently, always used to say I would be a teacher in the future, because I was born on Teachers' Day, which is celebrated on September 5th in India. Anyway, and then slowly I recognized that this is my calling, especially when the students continue to be successful, not only in what they are doing, but just maintain a good relationship with me still, even after they graduate. And then along the lines, I realized I was doing some of the work that a tenure track member may be doing. And I explored some opportunities, and I was able to convince the college to create first of its own unique position where engineering education would be focus of my work. And that's how I ended up here.
Wow. That's great. That's so awesome. You are like, that's amazing. What a story. And yeah, I think just having those advisors that are really supportive and really are rallying for their students and the the grad students especially who work with them are just great. It's important to have those people really behind you. I had a similar undergraduate advisor who was very much like that for me, who was always there. And basically, I think he sealed my deal getting into graduate school, because he was like determined that, I had a future in volcanology, and he was like, yep, I'm going to make sure that you get into the right grad school. So yeah, so brilliant. Well, we're so lucky and fortunate to have you here at Boise State, and really excited to learn about some of the research and some of the projects that you're working on. Great. Okay. And lastly, we have Eric. So Eric, what makes you you?
I'm here out of spite. I had a dad, still have a dad who loves this 4,000-year-old board game called Go, and he tried to teach it to me when I was little, and I hated it. It sucked. And my summer after my senior year of high school, I decided I was going to teach myself in secret and stick it to the old man. And when I started researching this game and reading about it, I fell in love with it. And that confused me because I hated this thing. And it was the first time where I was able to see quite clearly that difference in pedagogy matters. That like a book can be a teacher, and it can give you an accessible introduction that makes you love something instead of hate it. This happened again with computing. I went into chemical engineering to avoid computer science, and later found an accessible introduction. And now I do it as my job. I program computers to study chemicals. And in the same way that like folks say that you can't use storytelling in a thermodynamics classroom, I show up to prove them wrong. And so I am here out of spite.
Nice. Oh, the irony. I feel like the theme among us is that we haphazardly sort of just like tripped into our professions right now. So, so go us.
I think it goes to show that there's you can always reinvent yourself. And like I think about this a lot from a graduate training perspective. Like when students do their PhD over like the course of like 4 or 5 years, they become an expert at something and like in a really short amount of time. And whenever I'm worried that like something's moving too fast and I'm not like keeping up with the literature or something, I remember like, oh yeah. And like, I went from knowing nothing to knowing all of the things about my field in like 5 years. Like, and now I know how to learn. Like, this is a doable thing.
Yeah.
I shouldn't be freaked out about this.
Yeah, that's a really good way to approach it. Definitely. I think, especially when students think about grad school, especially the PhD, I think it can be really daunting, but that's a really great approach. I love that sort of process and thinking. Great. So I want to kind of get into the project that we're here to talk about, because I think it's super relevant to a lot of our listeners and to a lot of the students that we have. So you are all part of a bigger project called the Story Collider. Is that correct?
Yep.
And so can you just tell us a little bit about what the Story Collider is and sort of how it works and basically who gets involved with it?
Or maybe I'll start and then hand off to Krishna and Ann. The Story Collider is a national storytelling nonprofit that believes that everybody has a science story to share. And Story Collider's mission is to share the human side of science, what it is to actually do the research that we do and learn things. And I've been involved with the Story Collider as a storyteller and as a board member, and I'm serving as the board president. But that's only because like I like this thing that allows engineers and scientists to like express a little bit of their humanity while also connecting other people to the process of science. And it has started these collaborations, like these community building efforts to like learn more about my peers like Krishna and Ann, who have grabbed onto parts of this project and help it grow into something that was much bigger and more impactful than I ever imagined it could be on campus. And I will let them talk a little bit about that.
Great.
I could go next. So I initially started as a sidekick to Eric. I love his energy, and when he told me that he was doing this initiative, I got really excited about it, because I think for me, as somebody who is not from here, English is not a first language. Sometimes that storytelling kind of creates the narrative, and sometimes that's what people get connected to rather than my CV or anything else, right? And also so many times it helped me humanize everything I was trying to share, right? And I, worked with Eric to do the same experience for my students in the class. And that process of working with the students with the story collider, and also I also shared a story on stage as well, really the idea was cemented. And then I said, okay, this is where we should go in the future in terms of expanding this to the entire college and eventually to the entire university. So that's how it started. And then I met Anne in a cohort setting where I just shared, this is what we are exploring. This is something we want to get going immediately. And Eric, with all his other day job, this is a small part of it, even though he's passionate to do it. So he needs somebody else as well to help him, right? So it so happened that we had a little bit of time, but we were very passionate about the idea. So, and Anne suddenly was the right ingredient and the magical ingredient that we needed, who was as excited, maybe even more, to help us out. And that's how the uh, project that we started working on as a proposal started. Maybe Anne can talk about the proposal a little bit and where we are with it.
So yeah, just jumping off of what Krishna said, it was to my delight and surprise through this program, found some people, Eric and Krishna, who were using storytelling in a way that I hadn't actually really thought about it. So my interest in storytelling and persuasion had really focused on the receiver side or the audience side and how people understand, process, are influenced by stories. But what I thought, and that's obviously part of this whole initiative because people are hearing stories, right? There are audiences for the stories that are being told in a story collider context. But what I thought was really interesting is how stories can be used to shape our own understanding of ourselves. So by the act of telling a story, I am self-authoring and then view myself a little bit differently after I have told that story in the process of working on the story. And I read a little bit about that in the psychology literature, the whole idea that identity is really not a static snapshot. It's a dynamic story that we're constantly telling over time. And this was that idea being applied with so many other research questions that could be tacked on. And so, when I learned what Eric and Krishna had been doing, I was like, what? This is cool. Can I apply too? So it was really, I'm so grateful that they let me onto the team because they had already been collecting data and had this idea that was kind of, really, I don't want to say, it was fully formed. They were very open to me coming in and evolving it, but it was really like the idea was there. It was just, let's pull the pieces together, write this proposal up and get it out. And to me, it seems like a no-brainer, but oftentimes there are many things in my life that have seemed like no-brainers, but other people don't necessarily see them as no-brainers. Whereas this, anytime I talk about it with colleagues in a professional setting, with lay people, everyone goes, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And so to me, when there's that immediate, like, okay, I understand how this is a tool that can be used, some things are more esoteric and provide value in ways that people don't necessarily understand, but there's just an intuitive understanding of how story can be used to shape one's self-view. And to be a little bit more concrete about how this is being used in the context of the proposal, obviously, engineering is a difficult line of study to pursue. And so one of the issues is that students will start along this trajectory and a little bit of, way into it, a year or two, start to question, do I belong here? This is hard for me. It doesn't seem like it's hard for everyone else. And consequently, they'll drop out. So attrition is a real issue, particularly amongst historically underrepresented underrepresented minorities, females, a lot of the populations that where retention is really an issue. And so we thought, okay, we've got this problem. How can storytelling be used to help retain students in this time where it's, it's hard for everyone, right? So it's like, in a way, they're miscalibrated because they see themselves as experiencing a challenge, but it's something that everyone is experiencing. And so what we're hoping to do over the next 3 years in this project is first teach students via Story Collider and their expertise how to tell stories. So there is a science to storytelling, so educate them about that, and then walk through a series of assignments where they will identify a story of either about a challenge that they've experienced in their engineering education, something like that, and workshop it so that it can be performed. And then they will eventually tell that story. And we hope to measure before they tell the story and after they tell the story, and look at changes in their sense of professional identity, their self-view as an engineer, persistence, intentions. So I feel like I've had the talking stick for a while. So I don't know if Eric and Krishna want to jump in and fill in.
Maybe I'll jump back in time a little bit to give a little bit of a sense of what all this is. Like we said, the words Story Collider, but where did this come from and what has happened on campus? I was handed thermodynamics to teach as a new faculty member and was asked to measure ABET outcome 3, which is an ability to communicate effectively with a wide range of audiences. So I got this idea to do something around story writing because I had read research from someone named Jeff Shinsky, who had used Story Collider stories in his intro bio class and showed that after listening to these stories, students had counter-stereotypical descriptions of scientists. So before listening to Story Collider stories, it'd be lab coat, glasses, old white bald. And then after listening to Story Colliders, it was everybody, I can be a scientist, right? And I wondered if writing stories about science, about thermodynamics in particular, personal stories about thermodynamics, might be a way for students to have metacognition about their class and how they fit into the major, and whether this might be correlated with feelings of confidence about the class or belonging in the major. So in 2017, we got started with an IRB approved study to measure our students' attitudes before and after writing these stories about science. And then we started having Story Collider shows and workshops on campus. We brought in Krishna. Krishna piloted this out in his classrooms. Then we're okay, this seems like a maybe a big thing. Krishna and I started drafts of applying for federal funding to scale this up. And it wasn't until Anne came in and kind of pulled all of this together in a real interdisciplinary way. So I have some of the Story Collider service work on my CV. Krishna is just such an outstanding educator. He's one of the GOATs, the Golden Apple winner this semester. That is an award from the students. It's the most meaningful teaching accolade you can get. And
congrats, by the way.
Heck yeah.
Thank you.
And then Anne bringing in the science around narrative and how that understands, how that impacts identity, really closed the loop in a way where we had experience, ability, and theory in a way that I think made a pitch to the National Science Foundation that was bound to be successful. And we've also got another grant proposal in for doing this at the graduate level too. So hopefully we get 4 more years of funding for doing that as well.
Yeah, and if I may, I want to add one more thing. We also have another colleague of ours on this project that was funded, Dr. Sarah Hagner from College of Education, who brings in her educational research side of it, and her main focus is around STEM graduate student identity. So she brings a wealth of experience, looking through that lens. So that made us team even more stronger. And like Eric mentioned, we also have just recently submitted a graduate level proposal where we have brought in an engineering education researcher and looking at doing this more broadly for STEM and PhD and master's programs. Especially, we have a couple of transdisciplinary programs, so taking leverage of that and then doing it at two different universities. So we are looking to, spread the roots even more.
I absolutely love this. This is so fantastic. And I feel like um, just our department of the geosciences, but also me as an outreach coordinator can learn so much from your group. And so I hope that I can collaborate a lot with all three of you in the future, because one of the things that we're trying to do, and particularly one of the reasons why we started this podcast, is because, the geosciences is one of the least diverse fields in the STEM fields. I think we're gaining some diversity within it, but it still really lags behind a lot of the other STEM fields. And so one of the things that we're trying to do is make science in general, but also the geosciences more accessible to a broader community. So really, it's all about sharing people's stories and their backgrounds on where they came from. You don't have to come from a privileged white family to be in the geosciences. You don't just have to love rocks. There's a whole host of fields that you can be in within the geosciences. But we love hearing stories from the other STEM fields as well, because I think this whole idea behind retaining students in these fields, because there is this big thing about imposter syndrome, right? Like, you get into it, we all experience it. We're sitting here, and several times I've sat there and thought, what am I doing here? Like, I know nothing and everyone else around me is so much smarter. But then it's like, when I start talking to, the other grad students and some of the faculty, you start to realize, like, this is a very common feeling around a lot of scientists. And it's good to explore that and to be able to say, like, no, I am a scientist and I do research. And one of the things that I really love, and maybe you guys, I don't know how often you work with maybe younger students. I know you're at like a undergraduate and graduate level. But for my outreach component, I love going to younger students and asking them, what do you think a scientist is? And sort of changing their perspective on that lab coat and glasses idea. Like, a lot of people just think all we do is like sit in a lab or look at rocks. And it's fun to sort of change the perspective on thinking like, no, we're all scientists. If you've ever been curious about anything, you're a scientist. So great. I'm so excited. This is so awesome.
Also, fun fact, that the Story Collider has been doing shows at the American Geophysical Union annual meetings for a few years now. So for the folks that go to AGU, like, there's a Story Collider show at the meeting every year that I've never been to, but I know that it happens.
That's awesome. I'll have to check that out next time. And Krishna, did you have something else to add to that?
Yeah, I want to pick on what you were saying earlier about, reaching populations earlier than undergraduate level. In fact, one of the broader impacts that we hope to achieve with our project is to have a wide variety of audience get exposed to our storytelling intervention, or in this case, the performance. So we plan to have, wide variety of ages, different people from different sects of the society. And then also we are partnering with the STEM Action Center so that our stories can be hosted on their website, and then look at some other events, maybe on the Capitol when they have their showcases, to maybe have some of these students share their stories. So we definitely want to use this as an engine to get more students excited about what it takes. For example, when we had a recent show, there were stories that were shared, even their advisors didn't know that those experiences have happened for those students, right? One of the things that engineering lacks desperately is reflection. We are so good at teaching all the concepts, but I just feel like we don't pause for a minute and say, what does this all mean in the big picture, right? So this is probably the first time. It's probably like a shock for some of the students to suddenly say, hey, what are we going to like tell stories? But it's a good kind of shock. And even for the people who attended the show, they wrote me emails from my class saying, I'm so glad you asked us to come, because initially we didn't know what this was, but the experience really was very empowering to see and hear all these people had far more struggles than what I'm experiencing now, and then still keep on going with whatever their passions is incredible.
That is incredible. This makes me so excited. Like I almost want to do something for the geoscience department in this realm. So I'm going to be talking with you guys a lot and trying to get more of our students involved, because I think science communication is such a big thing now, isn't it? I mean, I know particularly that, for the science fields, they want to know that you can communicate science effectively, but also that you can communicate it in a way which makes it accessible to a broader audience and to maybe people who are less familiar with the science that you research. So I'm really excited about this initiative, and it's so cool. So what is the best or most fun thing about what you do? Either as this project or even as like a professor or just in life.
For me, the energy comes from my students. So I know there are things that we get judged against and all that, but I'm like, I'm going to first focus on students, and I will filter what the world needs in terms of how to say whether I'm doing my job separately. So I think just that working with the students and helping them with several opportunities. Like I do some random stuff, like I nominate students for commencement speakers. I do help out with, I reach out to all the people who are nominated for example, top 10 scholars. And I spend a lot of time working with each applicant, putting their best packet together, right? And then on top of that, we all do write letters of recommendation and things like that. I think my biggest thing that really is what I spend a lot of time is, when my advisor gave me this opportunity, which was not even something that I ever dreamed of, is I want to provide such opportunities for the others. Like when we had a student, Ulysses, who never thought engineering education was something he would explore in the future as a grad student ever, just won an NSF graduate research fellowship, which is really prestigious. It's tough to get, but then the fact that he took a chance on us, and now he's going to get a PhD in Arizona State University. That is where my I spend most of my time.
Yeah, that must be so rewarding and such a fulfillment, especially for the student, maybe coming in a little less or at least a little hesitant about, what future they have. But that's great. I mean, you're such an inspiration, Krishna. We're so fortunate to have you on this podcast. Anne or Eric?
Go for it, Anne.
Yes. Okay, I have an answer, and it is also aligned with sort of how I know that this is the right job for me. It is so fun to ask questions and be able to explore them, right? Like that is in part my job, where I get to be curious for a living. And it's just endlessly entertaining, right? Because there's always questions to ask. And it's always fascinating to look back and see what other people have done on the topic, and either like from a methods perspective, learn like how people have approached things, learn about theories, but then also go like, okay, there are questions that haven't been asked and that I can ask them too. And then aligned with the student side of things, teaching, like making students realize that they can also ask these questions, right? It's not just kind of like, as Eric was alluding before, science is not just the realm of people in lab coats. We all have the ability, and increasingly the tools are accessible to explore the questions that are important to us. So there's no such thing as a boring day. And anyone I meet in academia, I think if you are not happy with your job, this is going to sound very judgy, but it's your own fault, because it is your job to explore your interests. So I'm so grateful for that part of my life and job.
I think the best part for me is causing good trouble. I like I got into this because of spite, and I love that moment of learning when we realize the things that we knew before were wrong. Like that's what it is to learn, is to like figure out what we were wrong and correct it. And it's like in thermodynamics, showing that like we can use entropy to make systems get more ordered. That's something that's like
Yeah.
we were wrong about entropy being disorder. And using storytelling in an engineering classroom is another place where we can show people that they were wrong about their expectations for what comprises the right pedagogy. And I think that there's a real important component to systemic change that requires pushing against the rules and causing trouble and figuring out where the systems are unjust and fixing those inequities. And so I think that one of the things that I like best about my job is causing good trouble.
We always like the troublemakers.
Do we? Do we?
I don't know. I do. They're kind of fun. They're kind of, you learn a lot from them, I feel like. I also like structure. So, you know, maybe I'm on both ends of the fence there. So I'm going to finish up, well, not completely finish up, but one of the questions I wanted to ask you all is, what is the best advice you can offer to someone in STEM fields, you know, engineering or otherwise, about science communication?
There is research that shows that audiences are more open to receiving a message when the messenger is trusted. And ignoring this component of trust in science communication is the number one mistake that engineers make. So we're like, we're gonna operate from a deficit perspective. We're gonna fill in the facts. Once you have all the facts, you're gonna make the logical conclusion. And that's not how people make decisions. Oftentimes we come across as being elite or like snooty, and people are like, I don't trust this messenger. They're trying to trick me. They don't have my best interests in mind. And so understanding and gaining the trust of your audience authentically through understanding what their needs are and answering those questions is my number one piece of advice for science communication.
Can I piggyback off of that? I'm going to speak to science communication as well as communication more generally, given that I suppose I operate more in the social sciences, so less STEM, but still there's, you know, professional communication that's relevant. And often, and this happened just the other day, I was speaking with a student who wanted to apply for a position. And I was looking at the cover letter and it was so sterile and boring. And I said, add a little bit of narrative. What? No, that'll discredit me immediately. No one will hire me because they will think I'm not serious. And I think that that is a misconception. Narrative is inherently interesting. No, you can't go, you know, complete storytelling, right? In the sense that you have to have some factual information, and it can't be like literary fiction. I guess that's what the term I'm looking for. But a little bit of information about why you're motivated or why you're interested in a position, right? Like that is story, and it is so much more memorable and concrete and generates more images and is more likely to stand out than dry facts. Mm-hmm. So that's my piece of information.
Yeah, that's very valid. I think that, you know, human experience really does enhance some of that background. You know, it's the thing that motivates us and drives us, like you said. Especially, you know, for someone who's like non-traditional and came back to school to restart over, basically, I find that having that human experience is really what drove me into the field that I'm so passionate and I love, and really got me far in this field so far. Krishna, how about you? What advice would you give?
Yeah, so from my own personal experience, you know, writing and speaking publicly is hard. Right. I had the biggest stage fear growing up, you know, where I could not speak in front of people. Now I can. And writing is still hard for me because English was not my first language. Right. So I would say to students, you know, it is okay. You know, that is something that you will try to evolve and develop over a period of time. And especially when they're presenting their science, you know, they have to shift from thinking about it is about them and about their research to kind of really have the audience as the center of their work, basically helping them. Their mission should be to spark, good thinking, and to the point where the audience should be able to connect with what they are talking about, relate to it, and converse with them, right? And also, when you talk about public speaking, and especially with technical jargons and stuff, I always emphasize it has to start in other settings, not your traditional talks and stuff. For example, in my classes, I emphasize that they should be able to tell a story around what we talked about in the last class in 2 minutes. Like they just have to connect everything without looking at a formula or without looking at a thing. Slowly it builds confidence in them sharing that. And then without them knowing, they're actually breaking the barrier of public speaking, because now they're testing it out with their friends, right? And slowly that will come into when they get into undergraduate research experiences, and even when they get into graduate school. So I would say take the risk, and especially work on your I would say strongest weaknesses that you think are your weaknesses. Focus on those, and then your strengths will always be getting better.
That's so great. Yeah, you guys all have such great advice and make such valid points. And I think it really connects with a lot of our listeners and a lot of the students at BSU, especially in the science field. So I'm really excited to promote this podcast and get your names out there. And hopefully you'll see a lot more of geoscience students collaborating with you guys and coming to your workshops, because I think you guys are great and we could learn a lot from this project. I'm just going to finish up with some serious questions, and I'm going to ask each of you one serious question.
Serious question.
So I'm going to start with Anne. So Anne, how would you sell me eggnog in Florida in the summer?
I would promote the obvious magical benefits in terms of hair and nail growth that eggnog is known to supply, and point to the study in the Journal of Wishful Findings, and because we all know that people in Florida really care about hair and nail growth. So that's the key attribute that I'd emphasize.
Nice. That's great. I love how you leaned on some science there too. Let's see, Krishna, you're next. You just got this really prestigious award for your teaching because you're awesome. So if you could throw a parade of any caliber through your office, what sort of parade would you throw and why? Tough questions.
Right. I would maybe have a parade of all awesome graduate teaching assistants and all the teachers who I ever heard talk more about students in department meetings. I'll have all of them walk with me and show that we can be a T1 institution, which is teaching one institution in addition to an R1 institution.
That's awesome. I'll bring the cake and the balloons. Okay, and Eric, here's your question, really serious. If I heat my solid state hard drive until it becomes a gaseous state hard drive, would that enable cloud computing?
Oh, I like that pun. But when you evaporate your hard drive, it no longer has a state where you can encode information into it. So
we know that.
in fact, it would ruin your ability to do cloud computing.
Great answer. Absolutely. I'm sure we've all had experiences with our hard drives just going to the ether. I know I have. Luckily, that's why we back it up in several places. But you guys, thank you so much. This has been such a fantastic interview. All three of you are fantastic people. We're so fortunate to have you here at Boise State doing these amazing things for the university. And we hope that we can be more involved with your group. And thank you. We're so excited to hear more about the research and the stories that will come out of your students. Before we go, would any of you like to give a shout out to anyone?
I can go. I don't acknowledge the sacrifices my partner, my wife makes. There is no way that I'll be able to spend so much time I do with my students, sometimes ignoring my kids, at the expense of, I don't know. So I really want to give a shout out to my wife, Aparna.
Great.
I give a shout out to Will Hughes. He is my colleague in material science and engineering, and he's been really instrumental on campus as a leader, in part through his work in the ASSERT program that he helped start, that brought Anne, Krishna, and I together. And he's leaving for the University of British Columbia soon. And I just want to say how much I'm going to miss him and how a lot of this work is because of him.
Awesome.
I'd like to give a shout out to Crystal Russell. She's a professor at Pepperdine University, and she has been a mentor to me, and she's believed in me and given me opportunities that had I not had, I don't know where I would be today. So sometimes it just takes someone really opening doors for you and telling you, yep, you could do this. And so, yeah, really grateful.
That's awesome. Well, Brian and I would like to just give a shout out to all three of you. You've been fantastic, and thanks for coming on.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
All right.
We'll see you around.
Well, that was an epic conversation.
We'd like to thank all of our listeners.
Tune in next time for another Epic Earth podcast.